Good morning. Bonjour. Thanks for being here today. I'm pleased to be joined by my colleague, Sean Fraser, the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities. Later this morning, as you all know, the House of Commons will begin its fall sitting. Between now and when the House breaks for Christmas, we will sit for 11 weeks. And there is a lot of work to do for Canadians. Les Canadiens comptent sur nous. They are looking for us to work together and not to play partisan games. We are determined to do that. We will collaborate in the House. We will move ahead with action that will improve the lives of the people we all represent. That means we will keep building a strong economy so that people have good jobs. The promise of Canada has always been that people can count on economic growth and their own personal prosperity and success. And our team is committed to working hard so that Canadians can continue to count on that promise, particularly young Canadians and families who have seen their lives disrupted so much since the COVID pandemic. Canadians need our help. And just as inflation has been hitting other countries throughout the world, Canada has not been immune from rising prices. Les familles sont touchées par l'augmentation des prix à travers le pays. People are anxious about whether they can pay their mortgage, or in many cases, they are worried about whether they can ever find enough money to put a roof over their head in the first place. And so we have been working hard to ease those difficulties with announcements in the budget to make life more affordable. And we plan to do more. Just last week, the Prime Minister announced that we will be removing the federal GST for the construction of new apartment buildings, and that we are encouraging all provinces to do the same. This will get more apartments built in big cities and small towns, and will make sure that there are units with 2 or 3 or even more bedrooms, the kinds of places families can live and grow. Qu'il s'agisse des jeunes enfants vivant seuls pour la première fois, ou de personnes âgées qui espèrent réduire leur espace de vie, les prix des loyers qui sont trop élevés pour un trop grand nombre de Canadiens. L'élimination de la TPS sur la construction de nouveaux immeubles d'habitation est une avancée sérieuse qui permettra de construire plus d'appartements rapidement. As the Prime Minister said, our job as a government, as a team, is to be relentless in our efforts and use every tool in our toolbox to meet this generational challenge, because every community across Canada needs to build more homes faster so that we can lower the cost of housing for everyone. We also understand that Canadians are worried about the rise in grocery prices. We share these concerns, and we are taking action. While inflation is on its way down, the price of groceries is simply too high. Canada's biggest grocery stores are making record profits while Canadians struggle to afford food. This is simply not acceptable. And this morning, Minister Champagne will be meeting with the heads of large grocers. We expect them to come with a plan that will address the rising costs of food and stabilize grocery prices. And if their plan does not provide real relief to Canadians, we will rule nothing out, including tax measures. The Prime Minister also committed to reforming the Competition Act to enhance competition and to make large businesses more accountable to Canadians. And we will be introducing legislation imminently to implement these important supports for Canadians. Additionally, the Prime Minister announced support for small business owners and their workers by committing to make changes to the Canada Emergency Business Account Program, otherwise known as CEBA. This will include extending the term loan repayment deadline by 1 year. All of this builds on our record of helping Canadians with affordability. Our action on childcare is just one example, providing thousands of dollars in savings every year to families. De plus, nous avons présenté une stratégie nationale de logement qui était une des plus ambitieuses sans précédent. Mais nous savons qu'il faut faire encore plus. Nous ne relâcherons pas nos efforts pour améliorer l'abordabilité du logement. Our national housing strategy was unprecedented in size and scope, but we know that more needs to be done. And our ministers are all working hard on this. Our actions in the coming weeks and months are motivated by one thing. Canadians are hurting, and our team will be there to help. In addition to the challenges of affordability, healthcare remains a top concern for Canadians. That's why in this House this fall, we will continue to take real action, tangible steps towards a universal national pharmacare program. We will introduce a Canada Pharmacare Act in this sitting, and it will be a major step forward in this country's history. Cette session législative sera historique et nous encourageons tous les membres du Parlement à travailler avec notre gouvernement pour continuer à prendre des mesures concrètes vers un programme national universel d'assurance médicaments. And we look forward to debate in the House on this bill from all sides. But we do not believe that those opposed to pharmacare should be allowed to block it by deliberate political obstruction on the floor of the House. We believe the bill should come to a final vote in the House before Christmas. Canadians deserve to see action on pharmacare, not political roadblocks. And we call on all MPs to offer constructive, collaborative, and thoughtful debate on our plans. But we will not let self-serving partisan obstruction stand in the way of getting results for Canadians. And we have other priorities that will keep the House busy. In addition to forthcoming legislation, including the measures that the Prime Minister announced last week to address affordability, our team is also looking to make progress on a number of existing bills in the House this fall, some of which include Bill C-48 on bail reform, C-49, the Atlantic Accords, C-33 on ports and rails, S-12 on the sex offender registry, C-34 Investment Canada Act, and C-27 on the digital charter. These are all important bills, and we believe they are good for Canadians and good for our country. You'll see that our focus this session is going to be on affordability and public safety. Nous avons un programme ambitieux pour la session législative et notre équipe est impatiente de continuer à travailler dur pour des Canadiens. And I'm looking forward to walking into the House later today and getting to work. I'd now like to turn to my colleague, Minister Fraser, for an update on housing.
Excellent, merci et félicitations sur votre nouvelle position à la chef de gouvernement dans la Chambre des communes. Good morning, everyone. It's good to be back for the beginning of the parliamentary session here this fall. Our government has a square focus this fall on affordability. A big part of that, of course, touches on housing. People have seen the real impacts that housing challenges of Canada have had on real people, real families, and real communities. And though it may take some time to solve the national housing crisis, we are moving quickly to advance measures that are going to have a meaningful impact. Over the course of the past number of weeks since the recent cabinet shuffle, I've spent my time talking to anybody who'd take my call, municipal leaders, my provincial counterparts, home builders, nonprofits, housing advocates, to understand not just the nature of the challenge that we're facing, but what solutions exist to those challenges so we can make sure more Canadians have a place to call home. What I took from these conversations was a sense of real optimism. That there are solutions that exist, and we just simply need to understand which solutions are going to be directed at solving which problems. I've said to some of you before that we were going to be advancing measures this fall in advance of the fall economic statement. I hope you'll take from last week that we've already started to advance some of those measures and that there will be more to come. The first problem that we need to tackle if we're going to build out housing for middle-class Canadians in addition to subsidized housing for low-income families is to change the financial equation that's going to get builders building more quickly. You see, the nature of the challenge that people are facing when it comes to home building today has been exacerbated by a changing landscape over the last couple of years, but more specifically in the last number of months. As we've seen the cost of inflation impact supplies and materials as well as the cost of labor, at the same time that builders are looking at higher interest rates than they had grown accustomed to leading up to and during the pandemic, you see that those projects that were marginal but were going to go ahead have been put on pause. There are hundreds of thousands of projects across Canada in a similar position. If we actually change the equation by putting new incentives on the table, a lot of those marginal projects will be put forward again. That is why we are removing the GST from new apartment construction in this country. It's going to address a severe shortage in apartment rentals across Canada, and it's going to create more stock at prices that people can actually afford. There has to be more that we do to further shift the equation, and since the announcement a few days ago, I've written to some of my provincial counterparts and provincial premiers to encourage them to do the same. As I mentioned during last week's announcement, we've seen positive indications before and after the announcement from the governments in Ontario, British Columbia, Newfoundland and Labrador. Since we've seen that Prince Edward Island is looking at a similar measure, and I expect that we will see more who consider similar removals of the provincial portion of the sales tax, the PST in their jurisdictions, to further encourage the development of apartment construction. You will have seen as well that we started tackling another problem. That's the way that cities build homes. Granted, the money from the Housing Accelerator Fund may have been put in the 2022 federal budget. The program's working now. We've seen first with the announcement we made in the City of London of $74 million that's going to lead to the construction of thousands of new homes in that city by changing the way they allow homes to get built. They're going to be building more homes near transit stations. They're going to be building more homes near their post-secondary education institutions for students. They're going to be increasing the density, given the zoning practices that they have adopted in specific response to my letter on the Housing Accelerator Fund. And they're actually going to be changing the way they permit the building of homes to do it more quickly. But this isn't a one-shot thing. We've seen over the course of the weekend the City of Calgary have exhaustive debates about a new housing strategy. Part of their conversation, in particular when it came to increasing zoning density, touched squarely on the issues that the Housing Accelerator Fund is meant to address. And I don't say this in some loose and disconnected way. The mayor was directly responding to a letter that I had sent to her, indicating that if they wanted to benefit from the Housing Accelerator Fund, they were going to need to end exclusionary zoning in the city that I used to call home, in Calgary, Alberta. The reality is, these are the first two indications that this is fundamentally going to change the way that city build homes, but we have hundreds of applications in the queue, and we intend to get through as many of them we can over the course of this fall. Now, there are other challenges that have helped contribute to Canada's national housing crisis, and we're going to be advancing specific solutions to each of those challenges in the weeks and months ahead. Challenges around the productive capacity of the Canadian workforce to actually build the homes that Canadians need. If we get the policy framework perfect, we still need the workers who are going to be able to build the homes that are necessary. We have to continue to make sure that first-time home buyers, people who don't currently see a place for themselves in the market, have an opportunity to get a foot in the door, and we need to do more so we can keep people who are in the market now in the market for the long term so we don't make the problem worse. The reality is there's a number of different challenges that we need to continue to confront, but by speaking with experts, by engaging with communities, and actually listening to the concerns of ordinary people, we can identify the solutions to the specific problems that have caused Canada's housing shortage and Canada's housing crisis. But I have faith that by continuing to work together, we can reach the solutions, identify the solutions, and reach a better place where more and more Canadians have an opportunity to find a place that they can afford. Thank you very much. Happy to take your questions.
Can you give us an update of what's going on with Quebec in terms of the Housing Accelerator? The program has been announced, what, a year and a half ago, and there's still no agreement. What's happening?
Oui, merci. Et j'ai des conversations avec mon homologue pour le Québec pour discuter cet enjeu. J'ai besoin de continuer mon travail parce que la situation en Québec est unique. Parce que normalement, partout dans notre pays, le programme a l'habilité pour engager directement avec la municipalité. Ce n'est pas possible au Québec. Il y a une loi M30 et ce n'est pas possible sur ce projet de loi pour les communautés d'obtenir un accord directement avec le gouvernement fédéral. C'est essentiel pour moi de continuer de respecter la juridiction de la province de Québec et engager directement avec mon homologue pour...
Qu'est-ce qui bloque?
Mais non, les situations différentes demandent une solution unique. Mais je pense que nous avons l'habilité pour travailler ensemble pour chercher une solution spécifiquement pour le Québec et pour adresser le concern de la province, mais aussi obtenir les résultats similaires pour tous les pays. Just to clarify, because I'm still working on my French, as you know. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your patience. Realistically, we'll have to reach an arrangement directly with the province of Quebec because we're not going to override the jurisdiction of the province.
Will you support the Pierre Poilievre's bill? Will you support Pierre Poilievre's housing bill, given that at the crux of it is lifting the GST? Will the Liberals support it if this session is all about affordability and public safety?
Let me dig in on this a little bit, because I reviewed in good faith the plan that the Conservatives put forward. And there's actually some good ideas in there, I should acknowledge. Look at the 60-day timeline for CMHC. That's something I had been thinking on. Credit where credit is due. Scott Aitchison's been doing some work on this. There's things we agree on like that I think we can make progress on by working together. But when I actually looked in, if I can be completely candid, it was totally underwhelming. First of all, the GST measure you mentioned is a half measure if there ever was one. They're explicitly leaving out most homes that will be put up for middle-class Canadians. They say it's about building homes and not bureaucracy, but they would have to insert a level of administrative capacity to identify which units get approved in order to identify who's going to benefit from the limited exemption of GST that they're providing. What I find odd is that given the landscape that we exist in now, and keep in mind, we will be introducing legislation imminently to give effect to the announcement retroactively to September 14th on the day that it was made. This puts us in a position where the Conservative plan is now to raise taxes on the homes that need to be built that don't apply under their very limited version of a GST exemption. In addition, when I look through at some of the bizarre suggestions, creating a snitch line for NIMBYism when your neighbors complain about having more homes in a community is not going to lead to more homes getting built. They're also going to deny infrastructure funding to certain communities who don't meet their targets, which demonstrates they don't understand that part of the problem is some of the bottlenecks facing communities include a lack of infrastructure that enable home construction. Think about a community under its current iteration. It exemplifies what is wrong with the housing conversation in Canada, and it will not receive my support.
Allez-vous présenter votre proposition pour faire face aux défis du logement et du coût de la vie? Votre projet de loi, il s'en vient quand?
Éminent, ça va venir très rapidement. Je veux dire que ça va être très rapidement. Et c'est important parce que le Premier ministre et le ministre Fraser ont fait leur annonce la semaine dernière. Et c'est vraiment important d'introduire ce projet de loi et aussi que ça passe rapidement pour la Chambre des communes. Et je veux...
Un ensemble de mesures ou ça va être à la pièce?
Un ensemble de mesures. Et aussi, ce qui est important, ce que le ministre Fraser vient de dire, c'est que c'est plus compréhensif de ce que les conservateurs ont mis sur la table. Et l'autre chose, c'est que c'est typique des conservateurs qui font des critiques, c'est normal, ils sont dans l'opposition, mais les solutions qu'ils proposent ne sont pas des vraies solutions qui vont vraiment aider les Canadiens. Et ce qu'on a vu pendant les 10 ans que Stephen Harper était le premier ministre, c'est qu'ils n'ont fait rien sur le logement. En changement, notre gouvernement a agi depuis le 2015. On a construit des dizaines de milliers de nouveaux appartements, de logements abordables dans le pays. On sait que c'est un moment différent à ce moment. On doit travailler avec la classe moyenne. Et ce qui fait les conservateurs, ce qu'ils proposent, laisse de côté la classe moyenne. C'est super typique des conservateurs.
In English on the bill, so it's not just going to be about lifting the GST rebate, the bill on housing, it's going to be a bit broader?
It will be comprehensive with regards to the announcement that the Prime Minister made last week. And so when it comes to housing, when it comes to groceries, when it comes to the Competition Act, and so this will be presented imminently in the House of Commons.
Clarify, is the bill going to be everything that the Prime Minister announced on Thursday in one bill, like the Competition Act review and housing, or were you saying in French that a broader suite of housing measures will be in one bill?
No, I said it will be a comprehensive bill related to the Prime Minister's announcement on Thursday that is in response to the needs of Canadians right now. It's building off the really good work that parliamentarians have done over the past year. And as I was saying in French, it's actually going to move the needle, unlike what the Conservatives have put forward, which is typical of what the Conservatives have done. You know, they're criticizing, which is their job as, you know, the role of the official opposition, but it's not going to meet the needs of Canadians. What the Conservatives are putting forward leaves out the middle class. What we're putting forward is specifically geared to address housing affordability and attainability for the middle class.
What are you going to do? What are you going to do for people who can't find housing today? A lot of these measures are 2 years, 3 years down the road. It takes a long time to build apartment rentals. There are people who can't find housing today. What is the government doing about that?
Look, thanks for the question. And you've got to realize that the tools that we have at the federal level, as you pointed out, will take a significant period of time to grow the housing stock, and that's what we're trying to do. What people who are living through, who are sleeping rough today, need to do is to contact local authorities. Now, the options vary significantly depending on where you are in the country, which is part of the reason why we need to continue to implement systemic change across the country. There's things that we have put in place to help address some of the challenges around the Canada Housing Benefit, around supports for shelter systems across the country, and of course the continued investment in below-market affordable housing units. But people who are without an option today need to reach out to their local authorities who are actually managing the on-the-ground supports. And the situation varies obviously from community to community, but part of the conversations I've been having in particular with municipal leaders over the course of the past few months is how we can advance solutions, or rather measures, that will provide systemic solutions. But
Sending another housing benefit to help those people?
Look, we're not taking any measures when it comes to housing off the table, but we want to make sure that we're not simply putting money into existing systems where it's the easy thing to do. All of the measures that we put forward are going to be directed at solving the very specific problems that we've come to understand over the course of the last number of weeks in this position that I've had. To the extent that that involves making sure we can keep people in the market, housing benefits are one way to do it, but continuing to invest in emergency housing options is another, and we're going to try to work to identify the best solutions.
Sur la sécurité en ligne et la taxe sur les géants du numérique, ça prend 2 projets de loi, si je comprends bien. Est-ce que ça s'en vient cette session-ci?
Bon, c'est quelque chose qui est extrêmement important pour nous. Je sais que la nouvelle ministre de patrimoine canadien est en train de travailler là-dessus et c'est quelque chose que nous allons continuer. Bien sûr, nous avons vu les gens de web comme Meta qui sont en train de travailler en contre la démocratie canadienne et en contre le journalisme canadien et on va continuer d'assurer que pendant cette session, on aurait plus à dire.
Sur l'assurance médicaments, vous avez dit qu'il y aura un projet de loi cet automne, on veut l'adopter d'ici décembre, mais vous avez parlé de l'opposition, de l'obstruction partisane. Pourquoi vous avez fait référence? Avez-vous eu des échos comme quoi il y aura de l'opposition?
Moi, j'ai des expériences. Dans ma dernière poste, quand j'étais la ministre de Famille, c'était épouvantable ce que les conservateurs ont fait. C'était un projet de loi qui a passé avec unanimité à chaque étape dans la Chambre, mais les conservateurs, à chaque étape, ont fait tout ce qu'ils ont pu pour un délai dans le processus. Alors, comment pouvez-vous dire on va voter pour un projet de loi, mais on va utiliser chaque outil parlementaire pour le retarder parce qu'ils sont en contre? Mais ils ne veulent pas dire ça aux Canadiens parce que ce n'est pas une position populaire. Alors, ils ont essayé de le faire en secret, mais ce n'était pas en secret parce qu'on a dû attendre et espérer qu'ils ont voté en faveur. Alors, j'imagine qu'ils vont faire la même chose avec l'assurance des médicaments.
Et le Bloc québécois, lui, avez-vous des indications? Parce qu'au Québec, l'assurance médicaments, c'est perçu comme une intrusion.
Bon, on a pu travailler extrêmement bien avec le Bloc québécois sur le projet de loi C-35 sur les garderies et la petite enfance parce que le Québec est déjà un leader dans cet égard. Alors, ils ont été une des parties le plus appuyant de ce projet de loi parce que ça reconnaît le leadership du Québec et on a eu un accord asymétrique avec le gouvernement du Québec en reconnaissant leur leadership. Alors,
le Québec a déjà un programme d'assurance médicaments. Laisserez-vous le Québec exercer son droit de retrait avec pleine compensation?
Ça, c'est une question pour le ministre de Santé. Moi, ma job, c'est d'assurer que ce projet de loi passe la Chambre de communes.
On Mr. Polyev, you are both here criticizing Mr. Polyev for having a subpar plan, but you're playing catch up with him.
No,
So
we're not.
I don't understand how you can criticize him when he's been talking about affordability, talking about housing, urging the government to do more on
Marika,
housing.
with all due
and
respect,
then you announced the plan on the same day
We've
he
actually
announced it.
been talking about housing affordability since we came into office in 2015. That's actually not true. We have one of the largest national housing, well, we have the first and only national housing strategy that Canada has ever had. We have the biggest investments in Canadian history. The Conservative record on housing is abysmal, and we're going to continue to have leadership.
We're hearing that Jagmeet Singh is meeting the Prime Minister today, so how much of the NDP's agenda is going to dominate the House agenda this fall, and why not meet with other opposition leaders too if you want this to be a more cooperative environment?
Well, I mean, my position, and I've always been a very collaborative, cooperative person in the House of Commons, and I look forward to carrying that on as government House leader. We do have a supply and confidence agreement with the NDP, and look, we've been able to deliver some really amazing things for Canadians. I'll point to childcare. We were going to do that, whether or not we had the supply and confidence agreement with the NDP, but that's something where we share priorities. The Canada Housing Benefit, the dental care for Canadians. I mean, we've been able to have almost 350,000 Canadian kids access dental care in this country because of dental care that we've put forward, and we're going to be ensuring that that's available for seniors, low-income persons with disabilities, and children under the age of 18 over the course of the next year. Pharmacare is something that, as Liberals, we have been, looking to advance for a long time. We're glad to have this partnership with the NDP to deliver real, tangible benefits to Canadians that are improving their lives.
Any longer to introduce this housing? Can your government wait any longer?
I'm sorry, can you repeat? We couldn't hear the beginning.
Can your government wait any longer to introduce this housing legislation when you see that Pierre Poilievre's numbers are rising in the polls, and you've only been starting to introduce these measures once you've been seeing these numbers?
So again, I would say that since 2015, and Sean can talk about this more, we have introduced many different measures that have had a positive impact, particularly for low-income housing. And we will continue to do that. And the moment has to be right when you're introducing these measures, but I'll let Sean talk about that a bit more.
Sure.
Oh, sorry, the papers are...
The papers are attacking. Look, thanks very much. And I think this is really important for people to understand. So first, directly on your question about can we wait to introduce the legislation, we should move swiftly, but I do want to give people comfort that whether the legislation is announced today or a week from now, the solution will be retroactive to the date of the announcement. So there's not a loss for the construction sector by virtue of the precise time that the legislation is tabled, because they can go ahead with the projects knowing that the change will be implemented as of September 14th.
Are you saying that it would be next week?
Look, I'll leave it to the House Leader and to the conversations that we need to have amongst ourselves as a team to identify the specific date. But I expect you should see us to move quickly early in the fall session. Hold on. There's a second part to this question that I think is really, really important for people to understand. If you actually want to look at the metrics that measures that we're trying to put in place, all of them are directed to specific solutions, and some of them weren't necessarily packaged recently over the summer when there's been a newfound interest amongst wide swaths of Canadians in seeing rapid action on housing. We have been working to address primarily social housing for low-income families since we came into government in 2015, largely through the National Housing Strategy. More recently, we've introduced measures to change the financial equation for builders who are dealing with higher costs as a result of inflation and the result of higher interest rates. We have also put in a new measure. We started in 2022 with the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is now rolling out to change the way that cities build homes. We have previously put measures in place to attract the workforce through a category-based selection model in the express entry immigration system. You're going to see more from us that continue to incentivize changes here, whether it's growing the workforce, whether it's changing the equation, whether it's supporting low-income housing for Canadians, or whether it's helping keep people in the market. What I see with the Conservative plan is a handful of ideas that look, frankly, like they've been pulled off Google after a 5-minute piece of research, thrown at the wall to see what sticks, rather than concrete solutions to very real problems that the Canadian housing sector faces.
GST bill, if the Conservatives are so obstructionist and they're slowing down everything in the House, why are you doing this omnibus bill that's going to contain all these measures? Why not just a standalone GST bill that seems to have broad support in the House?
Well, look, what we've seen, over the past couple of years is that the Conservatives don't like to admit publicly that they're against something that is popular, right? We saw that with childcare. We saw that with dental care. Mr. Poilievre still doesn't want to say what he would do should he become Prime Minister on dental care, because his position will be highly unpopular with Canadians. And so, this is something that we're going to move forward with. We know we need to do it urgently. It's one of the reasons why the Prime Minister made the announcement last week. It's one of the reasons why Minister Champagne is meeting with the grocery CEOs today to really put that pressure on them, because we know that this is something that is important for Canadians. And if I can take a minute just on grocery prices, we've seen inflation come down significantly over the past year, but we haven't seen the change when it comes to the food prices at the grocery store. Groceries chains in this country are making record profits right now on the backs of Canadians. And so I have to give it to the parliamentary committee last year that did a great job bringing them in, demanding transparency from them. And what we learned through that process is that we have to modernize the Competition Act, right? It's just not where Canadians expect it or need it to be.
Parler de job meeting, il va déposer un projet de loi pour réformer la loi sur la concurrence. Il y a des positions qui semblent semblables aux vôtres. Est-ce que vous allez appuyer le projet de loi de job meeting?
Ben, je dois le voir, premièrement, comme ce n'est pas déposé à toute mesure, mais mon approche, c'est de collaborer avec les partis d'opposition. S'il y a une bonne idée, c'est d'assurer que ça sera pour tous les Canadiens. You know, I find it funny, I'll just say, you know, on Mr. Poilievre, he should be, you know, working with us on the GST rebate. You know, instead of having a temper tantrum over in the corner, he should say, yeah, let's work together. That's not something he was great at doing in government. He hasn't been very good at doing it in opposition. But from our perspective, whether it's working with opposition parties, whether it's working with provinces and territories, municipalities, or other partners, our job is to work together to deliver results for Canadians.
S'il vous plaît, juste clarifier, parce que vous avez dit tout à l'heure, we will not put money in existing solution ou quelque chose comme ça, that would be the easy way to do it. Est-ce qu'on doit comprendre que vous n'êtes pas d'accord de donner directement l'argent à la province de Québec, que vous voulez quand même donner l'argent aux villes individuellement?
Il est essentiel, selon moi, pour obtenir les deux buts avec le programme en particulier. Premièrement, travailler avec les provinces et respecter la juridiction de le Québec, mais aussi respecter la raison d'être pour les fonds pour construire rapidement du logement partout notre pays. Nous avons besoin de continuer notre travail pour établir les priorités nous partageons avec les provinces pour construire beaucoup de logements, pour accélérer le taux de construction du logement au Québec, mais travailler avec les provinces, pas directement avec les municipalités.
Could the monies be sent only directly to Quebec, or do you, at the federal level, want to send the money directly at the municipal level?
We don't have the ability in Quebec to work to reach a legal agreement with these municipalities. So we are going to work directly with Quebec. What we want to do is to make sure that the funds are used for the purpose which they are established, which is to change the way that cities build homes and to build more homes for Quebecers and for Canadians. But we, in order to do that, will need to work directly with Quebec, and I look forward to continuing my conversations with my counterpart in the province.
What kind of tone you're setting for this fall setting when you're saying that the Conservatives need to work with you, yet you're the one that's saying that Pierre Poilievre is having a temper tantrum, that his bill is underwhelming, maybe he did a 5-minute Google search to put it all together, and yet you don't want them to be the ones dragging their heels on the Pharmacare Act. How are you setting a collaborative tone on this first day back?
Well, we don't want them to drag their heels on the Pharmacare Act because that's something that is going to have an impact on Canadians, and we do want to work together. So instead of having a temper tantrum in the corner, I'm looking for them to say, hey, let's work together. Let's make sure that when there are good ideas on all sides that we're pushing them forward for Canadians. And you know, with that, I really want to thank everyone for coming today. I'm really excited to get started, to get back to the House. I'm looking forward to a productive, engaging, and collaborative session. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Merci.
Merci.
And I'll pick up all-
Merci. À la prochaine.